All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Metz, and I will be hosting, and I am a marketing manager at Brooks Publishing. Today, you are signed up for the How to Implement Successful Inclusive Programming. If that's not the webinar you signed up for, you should still stick around. So it is presented by Kathryn Wahl, who is also on camera with me. She is a director of the Inclusion Collaborative at the Santa Clara County Office of Education. Okay, and then to get your CE certificate, if you log in live with your email address, a link to your CE certificate will be emailed to you next business day. If you join by phone or if you're watching the recording, you need to take the CE quiz to get your CE certificate. Simple enough. So join the community at edweb.net/inclusive education and then click on this image to find the CE quiz. All right, and then obviously since you're on this webinar, you should be joining our community. So Brooks Publishing, we have the Teaching All Students Practical Strategies for Inclusive Classroom. You'll receive the following benefits: invitations to upcoming webinars, webinar recordings and resources, CE quizzes, and online discussions. So it's edweb.net/inclusive education. A lot of great resources there. And since you're sitting in on our webinar, we're offering a 20% discount with our code edwebkw at brookspublishing.com. We have a lot of great resources from early childhood and then K-12 on inclusion. All right, now all that is done, I'm going to turn it over to Kathryn Wahl. Again, thank you so much, Kathy, for being here with us. So Kathy is responsible for promoting, supporting, and advocating for all children to have full access to inclusive environments, regardless of their abilities, both locally, regionally, and statewide. The Inclusion Collaborative strives to build a culture that values all children by strengthening, sustaining, and ensuring inclusive practices. Kathryn has worked for the Inclusion Collaborative since 2014, being involved in the development and implementation of the EPIC credentialing program and the state annual inclusion conference held at the SCCOE, and that is next week, right, Kathy? All right, so let me turn it over.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer, for that lovely introduction, and good morning or afternoon or evening from wherever you're from. I'm very honored to be here. I am the director of the Inclusion Collaborative, and today we're going to do a webinar on teaching all students practical strategies for inclusive classrooms. It's really hard for me to sit still because I do not sit still. And so we are going to record this, and there are some activities within the slides that you can use, again, when you're doing it with a group to be more interactive. So we'll just see how that all rolls. So let's move forward with our next slide. I can do it. Look at that. There we go. That's my contact information if you want to go ahead and get a hold of me. And the Inclusion Collaborative is all about welcoming all students. So we actually serve birth to up to 12th grade, and then we have been working with community agencies and some secondary workability type sites to make sure that every individual is welcome and feels belonging in our communities. So that's a big mission of ours. Whenever I start a training, we always should have our expectations and norms. And we like to start with being safe and healthy and being respectful and friendly and kind. So I urge you to use this when you're doing any trainings or meetings with groups, just to have your norms. It helps everyone to know what the expectations are. And the safe and healthy, respectful, and friendly and kind are always good little descriptors of what you hope to get out of a training and what you hope other people will. So on a webinar, I can just click forward and just look at your chat, so we don't have to worry about your cell phone. So I'm going to move on. We always like to start out with, what do you bring to a training? And so if you are going to use this webinar in the future with your staff or a small group, I encourage you to pause it at this point and then have your staff or your group talk about, what do they know about inclusion? What are the benefits of inclusion? What kind of different models of inclusion are there? What do you make? What do you do? How do you make inclusion work for you? And then sharing your knowledge. If you can have a discussion before any training or any type of information obtaining, it's always really helpful for people to be able to discuss what they know beforehand before they learn some more information. So I find this is a really good activity to do before any kind of training. But it's a webinar, so we'll move on. So today I'm going to provide you some overview of what the Inclusion Collaborative is and what we do, and give you an increased understanding of the importance of inclusion. I would like to share different types of inclusion models, practices needed for successful implementation, and then the collaborative teaming and planning needs, because inclusion takes a lot of collaboration. That's like another word. That's why we are the Inclusion Collaboration, because those two words sometimes are synonymous. So this will be an overview for you today, and I hope that you'll leave with a little bit more information that you came with. So the Inclusion Collaborative is a department in the Santa Clara County Office of Education, which is in Santa Clara County, or San Jose, California is the big city. We have 32 school districts, and California is divided into county office of educations. Every county has a county office of education, and they oversee and provide training and support for local school districts. So in 2004, we had a little bit of seed money that we received from our County Office of Ed and First Five of Santa Clara County to provide more support and training for inclusive services. So we work with regular ed and general ed, but we also provide a lot of support for our community. So last year, we decided to look at our vision, mission, and our why one more time and update it, since it hadn't been updated for quite a while. And we realized that everyone who works for the Inclusion Collaborative really needs to know and understand and have a shared understanding of their why. So the staff of the Inclusion Collaborative, we've decided that every individual, regardless of abilities and disabilities, has the right to full access to quality inclusive learning and community environments. And we do review this at our staff meetings. We talk about it a lot. This is one of our bookmarks because it does keep it fresh and right up front that there are ways that keep staff engaged in providing inclusive services. Our vision is that we have a community that embraces diversity and supports lifelong inclusion. And what we do is we help to strengthen, promote, and build a culture in our community that values all children by strengthening, sustaining, and ensuring inclusive practices. So we did revise our mission and vision last year. It was not an easy process, but we did it. And it has really gained some good focus for us. And so I'm going to move on. We provide a lot of support and services to make inclusion happen within our county, but we also work on some statewide projects. So we do a lot of coaching, we do a lot of technical assistance, site meetings, resource materials. We have Make and Takes, which is a training. It's about 3 hours where people can come learn about a topic and then actually make some strategies, tangible strategies that they take back with them to implement the next day. As Jen mentioned, next week is our 4th annual Inclusion State Conference. And then we do lots of trainings for different organizations on site or at their site. And we do work with libraries and museums and the whole gamut. So that's pretty much what our services encompass, although we're always looking for new things, which is why I'm doing a webinar for Brooks, right? At any rate, here's our website. You can go there and get more information about us, www.inclusioncollaborative.org. We have a contact email there. You can go onto our YouTube channel and see past trainings that we have archived. We have a Pinterest channel that has different boards for adaptations and modifications. September is a really hopping month because teachers are getting back from school, and they are a lot of them are going on to Pinterest to get ideas. We have Facebook and we have Twitter, and if you want to sign up to be on our mailing list, you can click onto that. In each of our buckets on our website, we have different resources. So there's our conference, you can find all about it, and you can find other resources. So I encourage you to go to our website. So one thing that we do promote is person-first terminology. And this is the model of respectfully referring to a person with a disability by placing the person ahead of his or her label of disability. For example, I'll take my glasses off. If you were to call me an old, tired woman, I would feel older and tireder. So that's probably not as respectful. However, I'm just making a joke. That wasn't funny because there's no one to really laugh at me. But at any rate, when you use person-first terminology, you are showing respect for that person and then describing them. So it's preferred to say a child with autism versus the autistic child, because then that label they internalize and it doesn't help with their self-esteem. So we have a pledge with our county. Anyone new that works for the County Office of Education signs one of these pledges. You can go to our website and we have a person-first terminology bucket, and you can actually click onto it and sign it electronically, or you can print out your own pledge if you'd like to see. And I encourage you to use it with families, staff, whoever you're working with. It's great at a library, for example, a parent group, working with new teachers. It's really a nice way to raise disability awareness and promote the person-first terminology. So that's one thing we've been doing for quite a while. We always start out a training with, what does inclusion mean to you? And since you are a virtual audience, I can't walk around and ask you what you think, but this is actually something I would pause and have people discuss what they think inclusion is, because we have a lot of different ideas and frameworks that we bring to the table, and inclusion does not always have the same meaning with everyone. So this is a really good way to start the conversation. So we say, Mr. Wonderful, talk to Mrs. Outstanding, and have a conversation. So what is inclusion to you? I'm going to just put this little diagram up for you so that you can see what inclusion looks like in education or in society. You have the green dots, which I think are typical developing, whatever that means. And exclusion is where people with disabilities or differences are not included in the mainstream group. So that is not inclusion, that is exclusion. And before we had our IDEA law that was first initiated in 1975, this is what education was for anyone who had special needs. Then there's segregation, which some people think is inclusion. You might be on the same campus or the same site, however you're put in a little spot in the back or on the side. And so segregation is obviously not inclusion. And kids will typically be segregated doing different activities by themselves and not with the mainstream population. That is not inclusion. This is, sometimes people think that if all the bodies are in the same room, that integration is inclusion, but you will have the typical population working on their curriculum or doing their activities, and then you might have a small group in the corner or on the side or separate that are working on a different activity, and that is not inclusion. Inclusion is where all the children, all the population are all together in the same room working towards the same curriculum or goal. Now, they will probably need modifications or adaptations, but if the green dots are all doing science, then the multicolored dots should be doing science also. And sometimes there are misconceptions about that, and they'll have different activities that are easier, that are not applicable or pertain to that curriculum, that may not be considered inclusion because it's really integration. So inclusion is where everyone is in the same room, working on the same curriculum, but most likely with different adaptations and modifications to support them. So I hope that I answered that question. So here's the definition of inclusion. It really is an attitude, a mindset, a shift of thinking and welcoming everybody. The philosophy of inclusion is really important, that you share and have a shared philosophy with people you're working with. So it's an attitude, a philosophy. Inclusion promotes a sense of belonging, community and membership so that everyone feels like they are welcome. And I was sharing with Jen that I grew up in a military family, and I'm every 2 years I would be the new girl in the classroom, and I really have come to value how important it is that people feel like they are welcome and belong to a group, because when you're not in that mode of feeling welcome or part of a group, it actually gets in the way of your learning abilities. A definition of inclusion also includes that people value differences and diversity. And I always like to tell teachers, how boring would it be to have the same group of kids year in and year out? Those quirky, fun, out-of-the-box kids, they're the ones that you remember. At least I did. So people who value diversity and differences will be promoting inclusion. Inclusion builds positive social relationships and friendships. Kids who have different abilities, who are in the same classroom or same environment together, get to know each other, and it really builds positive relationships and friendships. There are many families who have children with disabilities who have never been invited to a birthday party, and I knew a friend of mine. She was finally invited to their first birthday party, and she broke down and cried that her child finally got invited to a birthday party at age 6. And so a lot of us don't think about that, that the potential of meeting other kids and building new friendships and relationships with other abilities is really important for young children. And I'm going to talk about why. Inclusion also promotes reaching your full development and learning potential. Those children that are in special day classes or segregated, they will not have opportunities to interact with typical, whatever typical is, developing peers. And so who knows if they are meeting their potential, if they are being isolated and not with the typical population. They found a lot of kids, when they do get to engage with other children, they really excel and do better in learning, and they're able to reach a higher level of learning potential by being in an inclusive classroom. So these are some of the definitions very quickly here about what inclusion is. Belonging and membership is huge. This is a key, really great quote that I always use, that when we begin to look beyond the typical way that people are valued as community members, and doing so, we realize that achievable goal of providing all kids with an authentic sense of belonging. When you belong, you actually will learn a lot better. So this belonging and membership is a very powerful part of inclusion. So I always like to do a little think, pair, share when we're doing this with a group of people. So if you want to take this webinar and pause it right now, if you think about when groups that you belong to, how does it make you feel? What words come up when you do belong somewhere? Even as adults, we tend to go sit at meetings by people that we know, and we may or may not go to a professional development because we don't have any friends going. So it's really interesting how this belonging and membership is very powerful. So this just brings it back so that you can talk to people that you're using this webinar with to go deeper into this concept. These are some frequently identified goals of education that are beyond academics, that Dr. Villa and Dr. Townsend in 2017 in their book, Inclusive Classroom Checklist. They actually found that in their study that frequently education has beyond academic goals. And if you think about, if any of you are parents and you are thinking of your ideal 25-year-old that moves away and is independent on their own, these are some identified goals that you'll come up with. But ideally, belonging and having friends and being part of a community is a very important goal of education. Mastery, being able to experience success, being a good problem solver, being able to reach out and keep learning, lifelong learners. Independence is always identified, and having a choice, being their own advocate, being as independent as possible. assuming personal responsibility. Those are all frequently identified goals of education. Generosity, being a contributing member of society, valuing differences, and being a responsible citizen, empathetic, are huge goals for education beyond academics. And what's interesting that VIA and Thousand found was that all these characteristics that have been identified as important aspects of education can be achieved when you have an inclusive classroom, because there are a lot of things that happen with kids in an inclusive classroom that promotes and supports these aspects. So inclusive programs, classrooms, programs use evidence-based practices. They don't just make it up. They actually have data that bases what they're doing to show that it's a real process that actually works. Inclusive programs continually adapt activities so that each child can participate, and that's really what's the bottom line, is that every child needs to be part of that classroom. And so if you have to adapt and make modifications, that's what you need to do. It's really important that inclusive programs have reasonable modifications to their policies, practices, and procedures to support inclusion. And so from the administration down, there have to be policies in place and procedures in place that support adaptations and modifications. And what they have found, that by embedding children's goals, developmental goals, into every routine, that children actually learn. Can you believe that? So looking at children's developmental goals and embedding them into the daily routine is extremely practical and successful. Inclusive programs also welcome all children. Everyone becomes a member of the class, and they all should be welcome, and that's part of inclusive programming. The importance of your environment. I always say the environment is like another set of hands or another adult body in your classroom. So a universally designed environment has to work for all. So inclusion is not based on children's ability in certain areas, and regardless of child's abilities, supports can be provided at multiple access points so that all children can participate. And multiple access points are kinesthetic, some movement, some actual tactile, obviously auditory, visual, role playing, modeling, all those types of things, different ways for kids to access the material is really important as far as a universal design environment. And there has to be quality of learning in that classroom and not just popping a child in to be there for socialization. Who benefits from inclusion? All children with and without disabilities, and all parents with and without disabilities, and adults who work with children get lots and lots of benefits, and communities benefit. So inclusion benefits everybody. Some of the benefits of inclusion for children with disabilities is that they're seen as a child first and their special needs second. They are able to interact with peers and they imitate each other. And I'll tell you that peer-to-peer learning is way more powerful than the adult-to-child learning. Kids will learn and imitate and model after other kids amazingly. It's amazing. Kids with disabilities learn to become more independent and self-reliant. They learn to cope and problem solve. They learn appropriate social skills. And they build a positive self-concept of themselves, and they are able to make new friends that maybe they would have never made in the first place. There was a study, Baker, Wing, and Wahlberg in 1994, that found that students with special needs educated in regular classes do better academically and socially than comparable students in non-inclusive settings. So there is actually studies out there that show that kids learn better with other kids in an inclusive environment. Jose Blackerby and colleagues from CAST found that students who spend more time in general education than their peers perform closer to grade level, had higher test scores, and were less frequently absent. So this absentee issue is really critical, because we have found that kids, if they feel like they're part of a group, same thing with adults, you're less likely to call in sick or not show up because you know other people are waiting for you or know that they're looking forward to seeing you. So there's something about that welcoming and belonging and feeling part of a group that has been associated with less absenteeism. And when you're absent less, you learn better. It's amazing. So benefits of inclusion for children without disabilities. Actually, the earlier a child is exposed to differences, the better they do with differences in their life. They can cope with it. They learn to accept and become comfortable with individual differences. By helping others, they help increase their self-esteem. Also, if they are helping others, they have to actually learn how to do something. And I don't know, all of you teachers, if you have to learn something, you make sure you've really learned it because you have to teach it. So it actually strengthens learning of children without disabilities. It really helps them explore new ways to become friends, decreases fears and prejudices, and gains new awareness of ability to express caring, concern, and compassion. And we all know we need a society that's got increased compassion. Okay, so adults, those of you that are teachers, being able to think out of the box and try to think of different ways to engage kids is actually very fulfilling as a professional. It was one of my favorite things when I was teaching, to see what's going to work. So you actually broaden your teaching and personal experiences, expand techniques for individualizing activities. You are able to provide a service for children with special needs and their families. You're really helping all kids prepare for experiences in their community, and being aware of differences and accepting of differences. And as an adult in the classroom, you actually get exposed and learn about different available resources in the community that you can then take out and share with other families. And there's increased opportunities to encourage acceptance and individual differences. So it's really actually good for us adults. Communities, promoting acceptance of individual differences throughout the community obviously is ideal. You get more collaboration of resources within the community, and you create that environment of welcoming and belonging, and they show that everybody does better with that. So what does the research say? I heard something. The research says that there's no studies conducted since the late 1970s has shown an academic advantage for students with intellectual and other developmental disabilities educated in separate settings. That was done by Mary Falvey in 2004. Thank you, Mary. And there also was noted in Michigan 2006, no evidence has been found that children with particular and or severe disabilities are poor candidates for inclusive programs. So the bottom line is all means all. And that's ideally what we should be promoting. If you go to swiftschools.org, you can look up their all means all little short video. I use it all the time. I encourage you to do that, swiftschools.org. So a little bit of background about the laws and the legal status. It really has not been that long that the United States of America have had legislation, laws in place to promote inclusion. So in 1975, the first law, 94-142, legislation required public schools to provide free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. That was reauthorized in 90 to 97. That required that students have access to children, that students with disabilities have access to general aid and related services. And the last reauthorization was in 2004, noting that requires students with disabilities to be integrated with non-disabled peers. So Individuals with Disabilities Act in 2004 promotes the free and appropriate public education. FAPE, as it's called, it also oversees the individual education programs, IEPs, and the least restrictive environment, LRE, and that's what the Individuals with Disabilities oversees. It is the law, least restrictive environment. Students must, school districts must ensure to the maximum extent appropriate that students with disabilities ages 3 to 21 are educated with children who are not disabled and participated in non-academic and extracurricular activities with children who are not disabled. It's the law. To the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are educated with children who are not disabled, and the removal of children with disabilities from regular education occurs only when the nature or severity of the disability of the child is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily, which means that you have to offer it. You can't just say, we don't have it. You have to offer it. And you have to really show that the severity of the disability is getting in the way of inclusion. In all cases, placement decisions must be individually met, determined on basis of each child's abilities and needs, and not solely on factors such as category, significance, availability of special ed, related services, et cetera, or administrative convenience. And that is part of the law. We like to point that out to folks. This is the new website that was just reestablished this summer. I encourage you to go there, sites.ed.gov/IDEA, and you can see all kinds of information about the Individuals with Disabilities Act. I encourage you to go there. All right, there's some sample examples of inclusive service model delivery, and people have different ideas about what it is. So pull-out. Pull-out is sometimes considered inclusion, where you have kids that are within the classroom, and then someone pulls them out to do a service on the side. So that's not typically inclusion because they're being pulled out, but oftentimes people call it pull out. A consult, maybe you have a regular ed class and you've got a child with disabilities or some service needs, and they will have a specialist come in and consult with the teacher to give them some information and how to support that child. A small group is where you're working in small groups, and that can be inclusive as long as you're working on the same curriculum as the other large groups. Integrated, as we pointed out, sometimes can be considered inclusion because the bodies are all in the same class, but if they're doing different things, it's really not inclusion. Embedded is where you take all the child, you find the goals of the child based on the IEP, Individual Education Program, and you embed them into their daily routines, and you get a lot more learning out that way. There's a combination of things. There's an itinerant model where someone cruises around consulting, basically. So those are all some examples of service delivery models. There's also the dump and hope model, which we really discourage, not recommended, where they will just place a child in to a class and then hope everything works out. But if you don't have the planning and the intentionality and services in place, you're not very successful. So we do not encourage dump and hope. So inclusion models, full inclusion for children with disabilities encompasses having children that are full participants and have the sense of belonging in a classroom. They receive specialized services provided in the classroom. They don't get pulled out, they get pushed in, as they call that. They participate in all activities and daily programs with activities and programming and adaptations as needed. And typically they will get instruction from teaching that occurs between the general and special ed teachers, and ideally that's the co-teaching model. That could be another long webinar. There's lots of different ways to do co-teaching, but we really support co-teaching when two or more educators co-plan, co-instruct, and co-assess a group of students with diverse needs in the same classroom, general education classroom. That is a true definition of co-teaching. So you have two teachers in the same room, and they have to co-plan together, they have to co-teach together, and they have to co-assess together. And that definition is from Dr. Wendy Morawski, 2003. In her book, you can see that. Co-teaching encompasses the use of a general educator who tends to be the curriculum specialist, the contact specialist. They know all about pacing, content depth, concept relation, curriculum sequence. In addition to that, a special educator is teaching with them in the same room and helps provide that expertise on adaptation and modification, motivation strategies, working on language acquisitions, differentiation, being able to differentiate different curriculum, and reading interventions and data collection. So the two of them together actually promote a great co-teaching environment. And moving forward, when you have co-teaching, though, you often have to redefine your roles and responsibilities. It is quite the dance to work together. And so if you are not upfront and talk about it initially, this can become an issue when you're co-teaching. So everyone needs to know what they're doing. And when we co-teach, we have to think of administrators. We've got general ed and regular ed. We have support and supports professionals. We've got special educators. We might have paraeducators. We have parents. Actually, parents come in and volunteer, and classified staff. You need to think of everybody when you're co-teaching. So the roles and responsibility, what they found via and Townsend, you can tell I like them, that flexibility and fluidity are the main aims of role redefinition. And so that's one characteristic of someone who can work in an inclusion classroom, is that they are willing to be flexible and do some role release. Exactly who does what from one year to the next should always be subject to change and determined by students' needs and complementary skills and the needs of educators. Because job titles and formal definitions determine how people behave, schools then really need to look at new policies and job descriptions that embrace that collaborative effort, which is key. You have to have administration that supports that. So redefined roles and responsibility. Traditional job functions may be redistributed and shared among instruction personnel so that the collaboration in planning, teaching, and assessment becomes common, explicitly stated job functions that everyone co-plans, everyone co-teaches, and everyone co-assesses. And this is a graph that we use a lot in our trainings to just look at the roles and responsibility of special ed staff as related to general ed staff in an inclusive education setting. And the primary role of special education teacher and aide is to take care of those students with special needs. But the secondary role is that they take care of the whole class. And for general ed, the primary role is to take care of the whole class, but the secondary role is to take care of the students with special needs. And what's great, when you have two professionals from different backgrounds working together, you come together with a lot more experience and practical instructional support. The bottom line is that all teachers ensure that all children are safe at all times using visual supervision. So they're not really my child or your child, they're all of our children. Inclusion requires that collaboration, and you have to feel like you're on a team going for the win. You have to collaborate with families, partners, staff. Inclusion requires a lot of people working together, and so it has to be a real team effort. Collaboration needs, you need to have that administrative support so that you have time for planning, and you need to have the staff that are available and willing to collaborate. Coaching is really helpful, especially for new teachers. Consistency is really important. The joint philosophy and goals, that is really important to discuss before you're tossed in a room together. And then encouraging that sense of community that everyone belongs. Defining characteristics of collaboration then is that you have mutual goals. You're all working towards the same thing. You have shared responsibility for participating and for decision making, and you share resources, and you have shared accountability for the outcomes. And so what they have found via Thousand, Nevin, and Myers in '96 was that collaboration was one of the top 3 predictors of positive attitudes towards inclusive education. So people who had positive attitudes towards inclusion and wanted to do it found that being willing to collaborate was the number one thing. The National Center on Education Restructuring and Inclusion, 1996, found that the availability of opportunities to collaborate by having team meetings, by planning together, co-teaching, or meeting with parents, it's critical to the success of inclusion. So you really need to build that collaborative time in and consistently look for opportunities to build more collaboration in. Problem-solving teams then work to coordinate around shared goals. They value unique contributions from members. So that's why it's great to have a special ed and a regular ed, the OT, the speech, the janitor, the bus driver, people all have their own contributions as members of your team. And then defining and changing roles of team members as needed. And then they need to use a cooperative process that includes positive interdependence, group interpersonal skills, individual accountability, and then the face-to-face interactions. Easily said, it's much easier said than done, let me tell you. So key components are that you have shared goals, you have rotating goals, you have meeting norms, which is why I modeled for you at the beginning of this webinar, not that we needed it, that, showing up on time is respectful, having your cell phone on silent is respectful. All those types of things are really important to set up collaborative team meetings. And using a set agenda with quantifiable action steps so that there is like a template already in place so that everyone knows what to expect and you're not just wasting time, as you know can happen. And then following problem-solving decision-making process, and you've discussed it and you have something in place, is really important. So the bottom line is, when you work collaboratively, you have to do a lot of trust, belief, hope, intuition, honesty, confidence. So it takes a lot to work together, and communication is essential. So it's very important that you take time to listen, ask questions, be supportive and encouraging. And again, that flexibility and an open-mindedness of different ways to do things is really important. The importance of communication with any team is to really make sure that you have talked about words of affirmation and how you connect on that level. Quality time, how do people perceive that? Receiving gifts, acts of service, physical touch, those are all aspects of communication that are really important to discuss when you're building your team. The power of we, some ways that your environment, if you're co-teaching, it should reflect that you share your environment. You shouldn't just be a guest in that room. So you should have staff names on all the door, build the classroom together so it's your room together, not just one person's with the visitor. Learning what pushes buttons, what behaviors are non-negotiable, and what do you compromise are really important things. And see here it says define expectations for behaviors. That's typically one of the hardest things to do with co-teaching. Designing a space that is UDL, Universal Design for Learning, is really important to consider when you're doing your environment. So your kids are my kids and my kids are your kids when you're in an inclusion classroom. And that's a really important concept to remember. Inclusion, the rationale for inclusion, there's a whole bunch of them, and you can find more information about this in BIA and 2017. But it really takes a lot of work. There's legal issues, there's procedural issues, our population is increasing. We have more disjointed I can't even read that word. Funding is an issue. They actually show that over time, if inclusion's done correctly, you can save money. Philosophies are important. Get that down. Have a shared philosophy. So all these things are really important to consider when you're working on supporting an inclusive classroom. So, I talked a lot. How we'll use this information, I would like you to reflect on it and think about it. And I believe we're pretty close to getting to question time.
Yes, we are.
Phew. Talked a lot. I'm going to take a drink of water.
All right. I'll turn myself back on.
Hi, Jen.
Hi. I'm coming back.
Okay. So I talked very quickly, and I'm sorry. I know there's a lot of questions here. So Jen's going to try to take those for us.
Okay, Kathy. So I do have some questions to ask you.
Okay.
So we actually did get a good list, and there were some great conversations that were going on. So one of the questions someone asked was, do you have any ideas on how to make story time and other library programs more inclusive?
Yes, we have worked extensively with San Jose Public Library, and I believe on their website, sjpl.org, they have Inclusion Story Hour, and they did, I haven't checked lately, but they had archives of all their trainings on it. But Inclusive Story Hour is huge. You need to do ability awareness with the staff, and I mean all the staff. You need to really look at making your stories more engaging with visuals and music and a schedule. Lots of things you can do to make it interactive. Good question.
Great. And then I saw a few comments on the side that there's a lot of concerns about the general ed and special ed teachers not having the same planning time for when they do co-teaching. Do you have any ideas on how to help that when schedules aren't matching?
Well, it's a master schedule issue, and that comes under the administrative domain, which should be set up. But if you're already in October and you don't have co-planning time together, then you have to A, go speak with your admin and see if you can squeeze in some time somehow, or B, you come up with creative ideas to do joint planning. But if you don't plan, you don't have inclusion. That's the bottom line.
Well, I totally agree with that. Here's one. What are some successful ways to collaborate effectively at the high school level between the general ed teachers and support facilitators?
If they have any collaboration hours, they need to use them as much as possible. Planning a 10-minute check-in every day is actually very helpful. I've known quite a few respite resource teachers that end up making a real effort to reach out to each general ed so that they know what's going on and keeping up to date. You could do an online chat, whatever you need to do. You need to make, communication a big part of what you do together.
I definitely agree with that. Okay, and then we also had some chatter on the side dealing with behavioral challenges. So how do you fully include a child that does have severe behavioral challenges?
Well, first you have to get a behavior plan in place.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have that open-minded flexibility thought and know that this child's going to be, it's going to take a while, but you're going to really deepen your relationship. So all that reframing really comes to play. But getting the support of the admin and coming up with a plan, I think really helps that staff together support that student.
Great. There's just a few more. So here's a good one. So how can we have older students learn the benefits of inclusion when they haven't, if they previously haven't had any children in their classes?
There's a lot of actually programs that are available to like high school students now. There's something called Best Buddies. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yes.
There's the PALS program. There's a few others that have, it takes, a couple adults or a couple kids that are motivated on the campus, and they can form their own club and make that connection with the student. They might need a disability awareness motivational speaker. Sometimes that helps. But if they get to know the kids and buddy up with the kids, that it's really breaks down the barriers. And the earlier the better.
Great. And then what is the difference between disability, learning difficulty, and learning disabilities?
Disability is just a general word to use for a catch-all phrase. Specific learning disabilities, have different requirements of things that make them that, if that makes sense. I can't even talk.
You have talked for a while.
Eligibility criteria. Thank you.
Great. And then we just got one sent to us. Lisa says, this year my school is implementing the SAM model. So a special ed teacher with special ed and regular ed students in one room with only one teacher. Can you point me in the direction for assistance? Or do you have any pointers for this?
You're going to need some assistance. I would reach out to your admin to get some training.
All right. And then the last question that I have is, what is the difference between integrated and inclusion?
Well, that's what's interesting. People use those terms interchangeably, and they're really not. Integration is where you have kids in the same room, but they probably are doing different activities. For example, I've seen high school where they have science and they've got, the typical population is working on a science activity, but then you've got a couple kids that are being included and they're drawing a picture. So the curriculum does not connect. That's integration, which is better than, but it's not inclusion.
Yes, definitely. Are there any other questions that we have? We do still have a few minutes. Okay, so actually we do have one more. So they want to know if the life skills class should be eliminated, mostly in elementary schools.
Whew, I don't think I could make a call on that. I like to think of positive behavior support versus
Agreed.
life skills and a social emotional curriculum.
Okay, and then we have someone asking about what I as a parent can do to help this process.
As a paraeducator?
As a parent.
Oh, as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
Parents can meet with the teacher and find out what they can do to help support that. If they're wanting more inclusion information, they can certainly bring some resources and references in to talk to the teacher. It'd probably be good to have a meeting on maybe what is inclusion and get that parent's input to the teacher. There might be some mind shift that needs to be done. So it's not an easy question to ask, except you'd be open, and it's that communication again and working together as a team for your child.
Okay, great. The questions are coming in. We're going to just take a couple more, and then if there's any questions after that, Kathy, I'll send those to you.
Okay.
And we'll post them. So we have, what type of method should be used if the co-teacher is also certified in an academic area?
Is that like a general ed? The general ed co-teacher?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. It really depends on the students and the makeup of the class and what they're teaching. There's lots of different co-teaching methods that you can look at. Having a special ed teacher to support the academic area.
Okay, let's see. Are there any other?
I answer that really easily, but
I mean, you're a pretty popular person here, Kathy. So then we have
admin. Admin need to know about inclusion because it's not going away. And so anyone who is getting their administrative credential really should be getting trained on inclusion, what it is, how to work with teams, how to support families, how to support staff, how to schedule a master schedule with some collaboration time, etc.
Okay, great. Let's see, do we have any? All right. So thank you very much, Kathy. We still have a couple more coming in. So what I'm going to do with the questions on the side is I'm going to send them over to Kathy to answer separately, and then we'll post them in our community. So we, for attending this webinar, you can save 20% at brookspublishing.com. We have a lot of great professional development resources and inclusive resources. So you use code edWeb KW, and that expires on October 31st.
Okay.
And a big thank you to our speaker, Kathryn Wahl. A lot of great information. I hope that everyone found this webinar helpful. And then again, to get your CE certificate, if you logged in with your email address, a link to your CE certificate will be emailed to you the next business day. And then if you join by phone or if you're watching the recording, you need to take the CE quiz to get your CE certificate. So join our community at edweb.net/inclusive education. And then Brooks will be hosting another webinar. It's on Wednesday, November 8th. It's the data collection toolkit, everything you need to organize, manage, and monitor classroom data. And that's presented by Dr. Cindy Golden.
Yay.
Right, and then please make sure to join our community, teaching all students practical strategies for inclusive classrooms. So thank you again for joining. We'll keep this going for a couple more minutes.
Okay.
And then I'll send you over some questions, Kathy.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you.